Iran has just done something that no country in modern history has ever dared to do. Right now, as you are watching this, the Iranian parliament is pushing through a brand new law, a law that would give Tehran complete control over one of the most critical waterways on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz. Under this law, American ships, you heard that right, American ships would be required to pay war reparations directly to Iran just for the privilege of passing through. Israeli vessels? Permanently banned. Forever. No exceptions. And every other ship in the world, oil tankers, cargo vessels, commercial freighters, would need to get written permission from the Iranian government before they are allowed to cross. This is not a threat. This is not a warning. This is a law, and the world has less than 24 hours to respond. Stay with us, because what happens next in the Strait of Hormuz will determine the price of your fuel, the cost of your groceries, and potentially the fate of the global economy. Welcome back to Geo Alert Live. I'm your host, and this is your daily briefing on the geopolitical forces shaping our world. Today is May 3rd, 2026, and if you thought the Iran war had reached a stalemate, what we are about to tell you will completely change that assumption. In the next 20 minutes, we are going to break down exactly what this new Iranian Hormuz law means, why Donald Trump has already rejected Iran's 14-point peace deal, what the United States military is preparing to do next, and why this single stretch of water, just 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, could trigger the most significant global economic shock since World War II. Let's get into it. To understand what is happening right now, we need to go back to the beginning of this crisis. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated military operation against Iran, known as Operation Epic Fury. The strikes targeted Iranian military facilities, nuclear sites, and Iranian leadership. In the chaos that followed, Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was killed. Iran's response was immediate and devastating. Within days, Iranian forces began closing the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow passage between Iran and Oman, through which roughly 25% of the world's seaborne oil and 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas travels every single day. That closure has now lasted more than 2 months. Shipping traffic through the strait has collapsed by over 90%. 20,000 sailors are trapped on ships in and around the waterway, unable to move. Oil prices have surged. Gas prices in the United States have hit $4.45 per gallon, up $1.47 since the war began. But now Iran has taken this crisis to an entirely new level. According to Iranian state broadcaster Press TV, citing Vice Parliamentary Speaker Ali Niqzad, Iran's parliament is on the verge of approving a sweeping 12-point law that would formally give Tehran complete legal control over the Strait of Hormuz. Let us walk through exactly what this law says. Israeli vessels will be permanently banned from transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Not temporarily, not as a wartime measure, permanently. Under this law, no Israeli-flagged ship would ever be permitted to pass through the strait again. Ships from what the law calls hostile countries, a direct reference to the United States and its closest allies, would be required to pay war reparations to Iran before they are even allowed to apply for a crossing permit. In other words, America would have to pay Iran for the right to use international waters that Washington has always considered to be open and free. And every other vessel in the world, regardless of nationality, cargo, or destination, would need to obtain formal authorization from the Iranian government before transiting the strait. This would effectively transform the Strait of Hormuz from an international waterway into an Iranian-controlled toll road. This is not a drill. This is not political posturing. Iran is attempting to legislate control over one of the most strategically vital choke points on Earth. And the timing could not be more explosive. While Iran's parliament is pushing through this new Hormuz law, Tehran simultaneously submitted a 14-point peace proposal to the United States, delivered through Pakistani intermediaries. And Donald Trump's response was swift and unambiguous. Speaking to reporters before boarding Air Force One in West Palm Beach, Florida, Trump said he had been told about the concept of the deal and was waiting for the exact wording, but added that he could not imagine it would be acceptable.
So what exactly is in Iran's 14-point proposal? Iran is demanding that the war ends completely, on all fronts, including Lebanon, within 30 days. Not the 2-month ceasefire extension that Washington proposed. Iran wants a full and permanent end to hostilities within a month. Tehran is also demanding a formal guarantee that the United States and Israel will never attack Iran again. A written, binding guarantee of non-aggression. Iran wants the complete withdrawal of all American military forces from regions surrounding Iran. This would include U.S. military assets in the Gulf states, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and elsewhere. Tehran wants the U.S. naval blockade of its ports lifted immediately and unconditionally. Iran is demanding the release of all frozen Iranian assets held abroad. Estimates put this figure at tens of billions of dollars. Iran wants full compensation and war reparations paid for the destruction caused by Operation Epic Fury. Tehran demands the lifting of all sanctions, economic, financial, and military. And Iran is calling for an end to all fighting in Lebanon. And critically, on the nuclear question, Iran's proposal kicks that issue down the road entirely. Tehran is saying, let us stop the fighting first, open Hormuz, lift the blockade, and then, and only then, will we sit down to discuss the nuclear program. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Kazim Gharibabadi framed it clearly, saying Tehran's proposal was aimed at the permanent end of the war and that the ball is now in the United States court to choose either the path of diplomacy or the continuation of a confrontational approach. But here is the fundamental problem. Washington's entire position, the entire reason Trump launched strikes on Iran in the first place, was to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. And Iran is now saying, we will talk about nukes later, after everything else is resolved. Trump has said repeatedly, unequivocally, that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. His negotiators presented Iran with a 15-point U.S. framework that demanded the complete dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program as a precondition for any deal. Iran's proposal essentially sidesteps that demand entirely. This is why Trump said he was not satisfied with Iran's offer on Friday. And this is why, in a separate statement, Trump told reporters that Iran has not yet paid a big enough price. That phrase, not yet paid a big enough price, is being watched very carefully by military analysts around the world. Because it strongly implies that Trump is keeping the military option firmly on the table. While diplomacy stumbles, the United States military has been conducting one of the most significant naval operations since the Second World War. Since April 13th, the U.S. has maintained a full naval blockade of all Iranian ports, both inside and outside the Strait of Hormuz. According to U.S. Central Command, the total number of Iranian ships forced to turn back by the U.S. blockade has now reached 48 vessels over just 20 days. And in the 20 hours before this broadcast, 3 additional ships were redirected. Trump has given the U.S. Navy 2 of the most complex missions in modern naval history. The first, maintain a comprehensive blockade of all Iranian ports. The second, clear the Strait of Hormuz of the sea mines that Iranian forces have laid throughout the waterway. Mine-clearing operations in an active conflict zone are extraordinarily dangerous and technically demanding. Iran has seeded the Strait of Hormuz with naval mines, floating and bottom-mounted explosive devices designed to destroy any vessel that attempts to pass through without authorization. These mines are not visible from the surface. They cannot be detected by standard radar. Removing them requires specialized mine countermeasure vessels, underwater drones, and expert naval divers, all operating in a hostile environment where Iranian forces are actively monitoring every move. The U.S. Navy has the capability to do this. The question is whether the political window for doing so will remain open, or whether a diplomatic deal will be reached before the military option is exercised. Meanwhile, the humanitarian situation inside the strait is deteriorating rapidly. The UK Royal Navy issued a statement warning that the near-total shutdown of Hormuz is creating a strangulation of international trade and a looming humanitarian crisis for the 20,000 seafarers who remain trapped on vessels in the waterway, unable to move forward, unable to turn back, running low on food, fuel, and supplies. Let us now turn to the economic dimension of this crisis, because what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz is not just a military story.
It is an economic story that affects every single person on the planet. The Strait of Hormuz is the most important energy choke point in the world. Before the war began, approximately 25% of all seaborne oil and 20% of all liquefied natural gas passed through this narrow channel every single day. That includes oil from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, and Qatar. With the strait now 90% closed, the impact has been catastrophic. Oil prices have surged to levels not seen in years. Gas prices in the United States have hit $4.45 per gallon, an increase of $1.47 since February 28th. Economists warn that if the blockade continues for several more months, prices could climb significantly higher. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Kuwait, all of which rely on the Strait of Hormuz to export their oil, have seen their revenues collapse. The economic pressure on Gulf states has been immense. And then there is the UAE. In a stunning development, the United Arab Emirates last week announced its decision to leave OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. The UAE cited its national interest as the reason for the withdrawal. But analysts are clear. The Hormuz crisis has fundamentally altered the UAE's strategic calculus. Abu Dhabi can no longer afford to be constrained by OPEC production quotas when its entire economic model is under threat. This is a seismic shift in the architecture of global energy markets. OPEC, which has governed global oil production for decades, is now cracking under the pressure of the Hormuz crisis. And the ripple effects are being felt far beyond the oil sector. Food prices are rising, shipping costs are surging. Supply chains that depend on goods manufactured in Asia and transported through the Gulf are under severe strain. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund have both issued warnings about the risk of a global economic downturn if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed through the summer. While the world's attention is focused on the Strait of Hormuz, a second front in this conflict continues to smolder in Lebanon. Despite a ceasefire agreement reached on April 16th between Israel and Hezbollah,
Both sides have accused each other of repeated violations, and both sides have continued to conduct military operations in southern Lebanon. On Friday, Hezbollah announced that it had struck an Israeli military vehicle using a strike drone, claiming the attack was in retaliation for Israeli ceasefire violations that resulted in civilian deaths. Israel responded with counterstrikes targeting Hezbollah positions in the Nabatea district. Lebanon's health ministry reported that 73 people have been killed and 163 injured in Lebanon since April 30th alone, despite the ceasefire being in effect. Iran's 14-point peace proposal specifically calls for an end to all fighting in Lebanon as part of any deal. Tehran views Hezbollah as an integral part of the regional front it has assembled against Israel and the United States, and it will not sign any agreement that leaves Hezbollah exposed and weakened. This represents yet another major sticking point in the negotiations, because Israel has made absolutely clear that it will not agree to any terms that allow Hezbollah to rearm, regroup, or maintain its military infrastructure in southern Lebanon. So where does this leave us? Let us walk through the three most likely scenarios for what happens next. The first scenario: a deal is reached. Under this scenario, both sides step back from the brink. Iran agrees to open the Strait of Hormuz and pause its nuclear program in exchange for a lifting of the U.S. blockade, a release of frozen assets, and a ceasefire guarantee. Trump accepts the deal as a political victory, pointing to lower gas prices and a restored global oil supply as proof that his maximum pressure strategy worked. This scenario is possible, but it requires both sides to make significant concessions that neither currently appears willing to make. The nuclear issue remains the fundamental obstacle. The second scenario: military strikes resume. Under this scenario, diplomacy collapses entirely. Trump, facing rising gas prices, a restless Congress, and the pressure of midterm elections, decides that Iran has not paid a big enough price. The ceasefire is formally declared over. U.S. and Israeli forces resume strikes on Iran, this time targeting the Revolutionary Guard's naval assets, the sea mines in Hormuz, and Iran's remaining military infrastructure. This scenario carries enormous risks. Iranian forces could retaliate against Gulf state military bases, causing widespread casualties and threatening the stability of the entire region. The third scenario: a prolonged stalemate. Under this scenario, which many analysts currently consider the most likely, neither a deal nor a resumption of strikes occurs. The ceasefire holds in a fragile, imperfect way. The Strait of Hormuz remains largely closed. The dual blockade continues indefinitely. The global economy slowly adapts. Alternative energy routes are developed, and the diplomatic standoff continues, with neither side winning and neither side losing enough to force a compromise. This is the scenario that would most benefit China and Russia, both of which have strong interests in seeing the United States tied down in a costly, unresolved conflict in the Middle East. Here is the bottom line. Iran's new Hormuz law is not just a piece of legislation. It is a declaration of intent.
Tehran is telling the world that it intends to maintain permanent control over the world's most important energy chokepoint, and that any country that wants access to that waterway will have to deal with Iran on Iran's terms. Donald Trump has rejected that proposition, but he has not yet decided what to do about it. The next 48 to 72 hours will be critical. The exact wording of Iran's 14-point deal is being reviewed by the White House as we speak. Trump will either find something in that proposal worth negotiating, or he will not. And if he does not, The world should brace itself for what comes next. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed before, briefly, partially, theoretically, but never like this. Never with a law. Never with a formal parliamentary act that claims permanent Iranian sovereignty over international waters. This is new territory. And nobody, not in Washington, not in Tehran, not in Riyadh or Beijing or Moscow, knows exactly how this ends.
What we do know is this. The decisions being made right now, in the next few days, will shape the global order for years to come. That is your briefing for today. If you found this analysis valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to Geo Alert Live. We are here every single day, bringing you the clearest, fastest breakdown of the events that are reshaping our world. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Trump will accept Iran's deal, or will strikes resume? We want to hear from you. This is Geo Alert Live. Stay informed. Stay ahead.